Mr. Speaker, amendment number 44 offered by the Governor to House Bill 1500.
Gentleman from Augustus, Mr. Landis.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, this amendment was a little bit of a mystery when we started working on this, but we did get some information related to amendment number 44. My understanding is the amendment simply would provide an additional $60,000 general fund in 2011 and $240,000 general fund dollars for 2012. The funds would be used for additional legal costs for enforcement and compliance with environmental regulations and applicable laws. The reason for this was a request from the Office of the Attorney General for the purposes based on what the Department of Environmental Quality has told us related to the EPA regulations and all the other things that are going on, which is coming down from Washington. There would be some additional positions and legal expenses related to that. So that's what the purpose of that amendment is. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I would move that the House agree to amendment number 44 in accordance with the Governor's recommendation.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Surovell.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Gentleman yield.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to yield.
Gentleman yields.
You know, a couple months ago, I remember reading in the paper that the Attorney General was sent a Freedom of Information Act request asking him the cost of all this litigation that he's engaging in all around the Commonwealth to the taxpayers. And my recollection is that his response was that none of all this litigation costs anything. And so I was really surprised as to how it was that litigation, he needs more money now to litigate some of these things in court. And so does the gentleman know which cases this cost relates to or exactly how this money is going to be spent?
Mr. Speaker, not being the Attorney General or a member of the Attorney General's staff or even an attorney, I cannot tell the gentleman related to what court cases. I can tell you that we raised the question of what the purpose for the funding was because it seemed to come out of nowhere. And in our investigation and getting our staff to look at this, I did receive information and confirmation from the Director of the Department of Environmental Quality that the funds are needed to assist in looking at and providing legal advice and assistance for many things that they're looking at related to the stepped-up EPA activity in the Commonwealth, the regulations that impact the Commonwealth. As you all know, there's been a lot of discussion related to the Chesapeake Bay and the requirements that the EPA has had. The Commonwealth has been negotiating. There are costs associated with those types of negotiations from a legal standpoint that the departments or agencies don't have the funds for. And in fact, the Attorney General's office has not had the funding for that as well. So that is the purpose of this amendment. I won't speak to the other issues the gentleman raised because I just don't know and cannot speak to that.
Further question, Mr. Speaker?
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields.
Does the gentleman know if, for example, the Attorney General were to decide not to litigate some of these things, which Virginia typically has not litigated in the past, and instead decided to devote those resources to these other clear priorities of his, whether we could perhaps fund his litigation in that fashion rather than asking the taxpayers to spend another $300,000 funding these activities?
Mr. Speaker, I can only answer the gentleman what this amendment does. I do not know the activities from the standpoint of the costs associated with ongoing cases and caseloads and the activities related to other departments and agencies that the Attorney General's office is responsible for, per se. I can tell the gentleman that for this amendment, this is to assist the Department of Environmental Quality for the legal advice and the assistance related to EPA activities and obviously it does cost money to do and provide that.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Gentleman from Henry, Mr. Armstrong.
Speaking to the bill.
The gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, if the Attorney General needs an increase in his budget, he ought to come over here and ask for one. I mean, that's what this is. This money is in here. It's going to be transferred. I've heard a rumor, and I don't know, I don't pretend to think the Attorney General spends these days listening to me or us, but I've heard a rumor that he essentially sends bills to state agencies that they got to transfer money back to him for representation. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can tell you that I don't think that's the way we kind of set things up. The way I thought we were supposed to conduct the office of the Attorney General is he was supposed to represent the governor and state agencies in matters legal for which he would have a budget for his office. And if it isn't enough, then do what the governor does when he doesn't think he has enough money, or anybody else. They come forward to the governor and try to get in the budget, and if that's not enough, then they come to the House Appropriations Committee and Senate Finance. But here at the 11th hour on an amendment to the budget, to come in here and let's make no mistake, DEQ isn't going to go out and hire a separate counsel. This money's going to find its way across the street to the AG's office. That's not the way that we do business in this state. That's not the way we do budgeting. We ought to defeat the amendment, send a message to the Attorney General. Next time he wants an increase, he ought to go through channels and come in here and justify it. If you vote against it.
Shall the gentleman from
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, I have to disagree with the gentleman from Henry. State agencies, including the Attorney General's office or any agency within state government, has the responsibility when they find that there are additional expenses that they did not know or did not plan for during the regular session, after the introduction of the governor's budget, after we take action in both houses, after the conference committee report is adopted, they go to the governor. That's the process. The gentleman from Henry knows that well. He's been here long enough to know that that is part of the budgetary process. That's why we're dealing with all 86 amendments today on the floor of the House and having discussions on them, because it's also our responsibility to act on them in favor or in opposition. And the gentleman opposes the amendment, that's fine. But it's not an unusual process. It's part of the normal process. And I want our members, especially our new members, to understand that that's just not the case. I'd also say that the reason for this, as I've said, I think very clearly, is because of the activities by our federal friends, and I would say related to what the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is doing and requiring states to do, is costing us more money. The gentleman well knows that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is appointed by the director is appointed by the president, and the president is responsible for that executive branch agency. That's where the cost is coming from. And also say that it's not unreasonable for an agency to ask for additional dollars so that they can have the proper legal representation to represent the Commonwealth of Virginia and our interests. So, I don't think this is an unreasonable request. I don't think it's an unusual process, and I hope you'll support the governor's amendment.
Gentleman Powhatan, Mr. Ware.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a motion.
Oh, okay. Gentleman,
Mr. Speaker, I move the pending question.
Gentleman Powhatan, Mr. Ware moves pending questions. May his favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Pending questions called for. Shall the budget be amended in accordance with the recommendation of the governor? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 58, noes 41.
Ayes 58, noes 41. The amendment is agreed to.